Hello, scientific writers. In this video, I'm going to talk about what it was like to find scientific literature in the 90s. So I started graduate school in 1993, and back then, just like now, when we were doing research, we needed to read published papers to understand the knowledge gaps in our field, to find methods that we needed to use for research, and to cite those papers to show that we had done our homework. And so how did we go about that? We didn't have Google Scholar. We didn't have Web of Science, Scopus, or PubMed. Now, some of those tools came to be in the late 90s, but we didn't have them when I started graduate school. So what we did have is we had some basic lab computers. They were hooked to what was the internet at that time, which was much less powerful and fast than it is now. And we would get some weekly updates about papers that had been published that week. This was called current contents. And so we could search current contents and find titles, authors, and citation information for various publications that had come out. So that was one way that we found literature. A second way was to go to the library and browse current periodicals. So back then, all the journals were still printed. They were still in paper form. And so they would be in the library in this special room called the current periodicals room. And it was really nice to just go in there, and they would have the latest 5 or 6 issues on the shelf, and you could just pick it up and flip through the pages and read articles that you wanted to. So whenever I would find a new article in a current periodical, that was pretty exciting. And I would immediately flip to the back of that article and look at the papers they had cited. And that was another source for me. That was the next source, as I would look at those citations that were in a paper that was important for what I was doing. Also in the library, there were some special computers that were loaded up with a database called Science Citation Index. Now, the Science Citation Index was better than current contents, and what we could do is search by keyword, or we could search by author. So we would look for papers that way also. And a lot of times this would yield pretty good results, but not as good as today's databases like Scopus or Web of Science or Google Scholar or PubMed. So when it was time to use the Science Citation Index, I would go and book some time on that station and sit down and search with keywords or with author names. And the keyword search worked pretty well, but it didn't work as well as it does now, because the Science Citation Index back then basically didn't have a lot of power in terms of search capacity. So it was limited to keywords or words in the title. Now engines like Google Scholar, they'll search through the entire abstract and probably through the entire body of the paper as well for key terms. So the keywords are not as important as they used to be. But anyway, the process was kind of similar to what we do now with Google Scholar or Web of Science, although it could only find those papers that had those keywords. Now, it couldn't link back to papers that had been cited by that paper, and it couldn't link forward to papers that cited that paper. And we can do that now with the current modern search engines, and we couldn't back then. Nonetheless, at the end of the session, I would have a list of papers that I wanted to go and check out. So I would have the title, the authors, the journal, the volume, the page numbers, that basic reference information. And then I would have to go find that. I would either have to write down that information or print it out on a piece of paper, and then take that piece of paper and go find those articles, and then look at them and see if they were actually something that I could use for my research. And the process of finding those articles is going to be the topic of the next video in this series of what it was like to be a graduate student in the 90s. Keep an eye out for that. I'm going to have a playlist of these 90s videos. So finding literature to cite back then was kind of the same as now, but kind of a lot different. And basically you'd have to commit a couple hours in the library for this process. I couldn't just sit down and open up a laptop and search for 5 minutes and then come back and do it again some other time. It was more of a commitment. Well, I hope that was interesting for you. I'll see you next time, and happy writing.